Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video from Maman Talks NRL SuperCoach. In today's video, we're going to be going through the 5'8 position, one that I think people have had a little bit of difficulty in kind of nailing down what option they want to go for. So hopefully this video does help you. If it does, do please give it a thumbs up. Do please consider subscribing as well if you are new to the channel. We are on the road to getting to 5,000 subscribers, which is awesome. I think we're like 16 away at the time of recording, so we are almost there. Do check out my stuff on Instagram and Twitter as well. And also I have made a Patreon where I've got some extra content, and also will be posting my team throughout the season as well. So do head over there as well if you want to show some additional support, which is massively appreciated. But let's get straight into the video. So taking a look at the guns that we've got on the list here. So starting off is Jaden Campbell, 700k, a 71.5 average, 33% of his games he did score over 80. But at the time that I pulled these numbers of ownership, he was only 1% owned. Now, to me, that does make sense because a lot of it is due to, well, one, he's got the bye in round 1. Titans didn't look great in the trials, although we know that the trials don't mean a lot. And I guess it's similar to what I said with Keanu Kinney. Just with Jaden Campbell, you're just never going to be quite comfortable that he is fully locked into that role. Now, pretty much that was his role from round 15 onwards last year, just having a look here. And that's when he absolutely killed it. His average at 6 last year in 80-minute games was 76.7. He had a few games playing at fullback where his average was 44. So if he stays at that 5'8 position, he's goal kicking for a Titans team that does like to attack. Sorry, just to correct myself, his average was actually 78.7 playing at number 6. So even better than the average that he's priced at. Draws actually not that bad after the round 1 bye. You got Bulldogs and Roosters in the first rounds 2 and 4. Roosters maybe not going to be as difficult. Basically though, there's no Melbourne or Penrith in the opening 12 weeks, which is generally my benchmark for thinking, is this draw difficult? You can even throw the Sharks in there, who are pretty good defense. They don't play any of those 3 teams. So draw actually looks pretty decent. Goal kicking is definitely a huge plus. I think the big thing is firstly that round 1 bye, but also that I think there's maybe not quite locked in on his job security. You know, AJ Brimson is there, Keanu Kinney, Kieran Foran, all of these guys can kind of intermingle, and we're just not quite sure what it's going to be for Campbell. My gut feel is that he will just stay at number 6. There's been some talk I've heard of him actually moving to the 7. Not many data points to support what his average looks like at number 7. I think there's enough ifs there where, because you're paying such a high price, I'd probably lean away from it at the moment and just say, oh, I just want to see how it plays out. And if he comes out of the blocks firing, looks like he's locked in at number 6, then we can reevaluate. But at the moment, just not quite ready to pay that price. Numbers do look good, but I just want to see it a little bit more in terms of his role locked in before I think I jump on. Martin is also a very interesting one. 663k, 38% of his games he scored over 80, which was actually the highest of anyone on this list here. And he had an average of 67.8. Similarly though, ownership very, very low, only at 1%. I think people are probably looking at Tamara Martin with the view that, look, that season that he had last year, maybe it was a bit of an outlier, maybe not something that he's going to repeat, because he's had other seasons in the NRL playing at fullback, playing at 5'8", and he hasn't never really averaged that before. This is probably the highest he's ever averaged. For example, if you look just quickly back to 2023, he had a few games where he did play at 6 and played about 76 plus minutes, and his average in those games was 45. Last year though, I guess it was a new team in the Warriors, and he completely was reinvigorated when Shaun Johnson wasn't in that team, and he was kind of leading the ship. So if you look at his averages playing at 6, 53.3 from last year, his average at 7 was 79. Like, he was absolutely unbelievable. I think what benefited him, just having a quick look at some of his big scores from last year, he was playing a lot of these gun teams as they were approaching Origin. For example, Roosters in round 10, Panthers in round 11, where he scored 38 versus the Roosters, but he did go 93 versus Penrith. Then he had the Dolphins and Cowboys in round 12 and round 14, 2 teams that would have had their Origin stars kind of close to leaving or being out, where he did score 115 and 111. Then he did back up big scores with 102 versus the Broncos and 105 versus the Dolphins in round 23. So he had some big scores in him. There were a couple of low games, like a 43 and a 29, but it was offset by some really, really big games. So that probably shows maybe the consistency is not quite there. He's going to be someone who, you know, look, if you look at the base stats here of 25, it's not on the same level as a Brown, Galvin, or a Munster, and he doesn't goal kick. I think the Warriors so far have looked pretty good in the trials. I think the reason people probably also aren't looking at him too strongly is, we'll get to Luke Metcalf later, but he's looking pretty much a lock and load, I think, in most people's teams. I think they're just probably a little bit concerned about doubling up. Do you really want to have both of Metcalf and Tamara Martin? Tamara Martin is available at halfback as well, I believe, so you can pick him up there. But again, at halfback, you're thinking, well, there's Cleary, there's Hines. I think I'd probably prefer them two. If Tom Duffy does become an available cheapie, you're probably going to want to go one of Cleary, Hines, and then Tom Duffy, or just both, maybe Cleary, Hines. Tamari Martin probably doesn't fit there. You'd probably rather him at 5'8", but then Luke Metcalf in the same team and goal kicking for cheaper looks way more obvious. So I think people are probably just looking at it as maybe I don't want to double up. But I'm very interested in him because the numbers do look really good from last year when he was playing at 7. But for me, probably not to begin the season. Now, getting on to Dylan Brown, who, if you've been watching the channel for a few years, you know I'm a very big fan of his when it comes to SuperCoach. He's often my starting 5'8". I'm pretty sure he's been my starting 5'8" for the last 3 years running. And that's because I'm a bit boring. And if you look at the base stats of Dylan Brown, base average of 32, which is actually the lowest it was in the last 3 years, but still on par with some of the best 5'8s that we've got. He's just ultra safe, ultra consistent. He's never going to really throw up a bad score because, you know, he's got such a good base work rate. For example, his low score from last year was 36. Ceiling probably just wasn't quite there from last year as it was maybe in other seasons, hence the average of only 66. He had one big game against the Dragons last year where he did score 162, but I think also his average was slightly impacted by having some games where he was playing at 7, and I do think that he fares much better with Mitch Moses in the side. I've just got a slide with a bit more of a deep dive on him. One good thing with him, because of the good base stats, if you look back at his average over the last 3 years versus what you'd consider easy and tough opponents, there's not that big of a difference between the two. 73.8 against the easy, 69.7 against the hard opponents. And it hasn't. Last year was probably the biggest drop off when it came to versing hard opposition. But I'm willing to bet a lot of that was due to also the lack of Mitch Moses. Mitch Moses being back available from round 1, I think is just going to help that Eel side massively. There is some contract talk about him, whether he moves to another club, but that doesn't seem like it's going to be happening until maybe June, July. So I think if you're really struggling at 5'8", look, he was 11% owned, so not super high. The draw is a bit of a mixed bag, but it's overall, I think it's fine. There is Melbourne in round 1, but then you do have the Tigers straight after that. He does also play the Tigers again in round 7 before a bye in round 8. Overall, the draw is not that bad. If you look back at the previous seasons, I mentioned it already, his base stats were the lowest last year. 38 and 35 was what it was in previous seasons. This is maybe a hypothesis, nothing to back this up. I'm willing to bet a lot of that was due to maybe the Eels just getting smashed at times. Therefore, there's just less time available on the pitch to actually do things like make tackles and stuff. When you're standing behind the goalpost, just that little bit longer. So I think that's probably one thing maybe to consider with Dill Bags. Or it could continue because maybe he's been told, you know, don't tackle your butt off. We need you to be kind of fresh, ready to go for attacking sets. But he's a young player still, so I'm sure that's not really the case. I'm sure he's just maybe had a bit of a down year. That's what I'm willing to think. And so you just know with him, he's someone who is generally going to get you at least a 50. Between 50 and 70 is kind of where he sits, but he does have those occasional big games. I think if you're really struggling to start round 1 and you want to spend that little bit more, I think Dill Bags is the ultimate safety guy. The numbers back that up as well versus the easy and tough opponents. I think he'd be where I'd be landing if you want to go with that little bit of a safer option. Moving on to Matt Burton, who's also seeing a little bit of interest in the preseason, 9% ownership with an average of 66.3 from last year. 27% of his games last year, he did also score over 80. Now, Matt Burton also had a bit of a strange season where his first 2 games were very poor. I think he scored like 15 and 36. But after that, he went on and absolutely killed it really for the rest of the season. So yeah, looking at the first 3 rounds, looking at 15, 50, and 35. I've actually written more of a deep dive on Matt Burton on Patreon, so go over there if you want to check that out. But basically what happened was after round 5, look, there were some tough matchups in the beginning, but then he went 67, 147, 79, 80, 73, 80, 80, 81. Then it did go down to 39 and 16, but he did have the stretch where he was pulling a lot of scores back to back consistently. A lot of that is due to the Bulldogs obviously having such an improvement last year. Point scoring was up, and he's also the goal kicker. That's the biggest thing that you look at when you see the numbers below me. His scoring average compared to all these other guys is much higher. That's because he does benefit from the goal kicks. He's not your biggest base stat guy. You know, he's on 25, similar with Tamari Martin. He does rely a bit more on the goal kicking. But the good thing with the Bulldogs is they actually have got a pretty good draw as well to open the year. No Melbourne or Penrith in the opening 12 weeks. They've only got the Sharks in round 4 and then a bye in round 6. Look, you can say round 7 and 8 against the Bunnies and Broncos could be a little bit tougher, but you do have Dragons, Titans, and Parramatta as your opening 3. That does look very tempting. So I think if you're looking to go maybe with a little bit of a higher upside pick because he had hit 80 more times than Dill Bags, Better draw probably, I'd argue as well. Matt Burton goal kicking could be the way that you go to open your squad in round 1. Strangely, he's never really been a feature for me. I think, no, that's not quite true. Like, I've considered him in the past, but even for round 1, again, maybe because I'm boring, I'm just a bit concerned when I see like him having scores of 16, 19, and 15. I feel like I just don't want to put myself through that at the beginning and go through the mental thing of, oh, I've stuffed up, I've gone with this pick who's low, I scored really low, and what's the meme? I'm never going to financially recover from this type thing. I'm just going to quickly jump to a deep dive slide that I do have on Matt Burton. So before last year, he was pretty consistent, averaging about 57. Also similar with Dillbags though, he doesn't seem to have a difference when it comes to versing easy or hard opposition. 59.9 versus easy and 60 versus hard, pretty much identical. So again, draw probably doesn't really matter so much with Matt Burton. I think probably more, what do you believe about the Bulldogs as a team, and therefore him being the goal kicker, how's he going to feature in that? To be honest, if I had to guess, I don't think his average really goes that much higher from the 66. I feel like that's probably about what he is. So again, we're not looking at this as a kind of value proposition. Dillbags could maybe be offering a little bit better value because he's someone who has averaged 75 and 77 in the past, and he's priced at 66. With Burton, this is the highest we've ever seen him average, except for that one season he had at Penrith where he's playing at centre, but he scored a bucket load of tries as well in that year. So Burton is interesting because I like the fact that he's goal kicking. You can see his goal kicking numbers being pretty much the highest it was in the last few years. Everything else stats-wise was actually pretty even. Base didn't change that much. Evasive numbers were identical. Creative numbers were identical. It was really the scoring. So I think it really does come down to, do I think the Bulldogs are going to be scoring more points? With a decent draw, I would argue that yes, that could happen. So you might actually be able to get him around averaging maybe between 70 to 75 for the opening weeks. And if he features for Origin, for example, then maybe you can move him. Otherwise, he's a pretty steady pick that you can just hold as well. So I actually don't hate it. Me personally would still take Dill Brown, I think, over Matt Burton. I know it goes against my goal kicking thing, but I do like Dill Brown's safety. Matt Burton's probably going to be a little bit lower, but also having a little bit of a higher score as well. So if you like chasing that upside, Matt Burton's probably the way I'd be going them out of the two. Next player we had on the list was Lockie Galvin. 624k, had an absolutely stellar rookie season last year, only currently 5% owned. Definitely one of my favorites from last year because I actually had him all the way from round 1, and I don't think I ever traded him. So he was one of the few picks in my team who I just never got rid of. So he was just so solid for me, 63.8. He's similar to Dillbags and Munster in the way that he does score his points. Not a big try scorer himself, but very big on the base stats. So he had a base average of 30 from last year. And then the creative and the evasive numbers, similar profile, I guess, to also a Munster and a Dylan Brown. So it's kind of like a light version of them, I guess. So again, if you like that consistency, he is someone who did display that last year. I guess the big concern I probably have is how is he going to feature with Jerome Luai? We just don't know that quite yet. Draw-wise for the Tigers actually looks very good. No Melbourne or Penrith up until round 10. They do have the Sharks in round 8, but apart from that, it's a pretty good draw. We've got his stats up here as well from last year when he was versing easy and tough opposition. He definitely did feature better against the easy opponents, 68.9 average versus them, compared to 51 versus the tough opposition. So you'd probably lean towards saying, his 63.8 average that he's priced at, it's probably going to get closer to that, given that the draw looks pretty good in the opening few weeks. I guess the big question mark that I do have is how is he going to feature or work with Jerome Luai? Obviously, Jerome Luai coming to that squad, Luai's probably going to be the dominant playmaker. We just don't know how that's going to work with Galvin. How is he going to improve from last year, or is there going to be an improvement? What's his role going to look like in that team? That's probably the one thing that does give me some pause. And while the draw is good, look, the Tigers do have a lot of turnover. They are going to be still working things out. And a thing I want to keep telling myself is while draw is important, I don't want to place too much emphasis on it. Probably what is more important to think about is role changes and how's that going to impact other players. So even though the draw is good, and look, I could be wrong. You could start with a Burton or a Galvin. You could start with a Burton or a Dill Brown. And if you get it wrong at the beginning and Galvin absolutely kills it, I guess you've got that ability to always just trade down to Galvin. But I think I'm happy to maybe avoid for round 1, not because I don't think he's going to be a good pick. I just want to see how it plays out with Luai. If it looks like he's still got the same role as last year, then sure, happy to jump on at some point because he is a player who he scores points in my kind of way in SuperCoach with good base stats. So he's generally not going to pump out that many bad scores. But I guess it also does come down to the Tigers and role. but you can't really question the numbers. When it comes to versing easy opponents, the average steps up, reduces versus the hard opposition. So hopefully that makes him someone that we can just pick at the right time when the draw does open up. So I don't mind starting there if you're like, say, Tigers fan, or you just believe in him and think, look, he's just that good. I think he's just going to replicate it. I'm probably more thinking that I think he's going to have a good season. I don't think he's going to suffer too much from second year syndrome, but I just want to see what it looks like with Jerome Luai by his side. So Cam Munster being our next gun player. Now he is very, very enticing. 609k. He had an average of 62.2 from last year, but that was very heavily impacted by injuries in games where he played kind of like 40, 49 minutes. In the table below me, what I've actually pulled is his stats from his games where he played over 60 minutes. So not even 80-minute games, just specifically the 60-minute games. And then it becomes much more aligned with what we expect from Cam Munster historically when it comes to SuperCoach. He is normally someone who averages around the 70 to 75 or high 60s. He doesn't really stray too far from that. And last year, if you take out those injury-affected games or the games with lower minutes, the numbers do suggest that he was performing at that level. So I think with Munster, yes, I think it was hip surgery in the off-season. Does have that early buy in round 2. So if that's enough for you to say, you know what, I'm not going to start with him, I just want to see how he goes, I completely get it. I think the good thing with Munster, though, is that if you get him, I think he's probably the one gun on here who probably does offer the best value, where his price could be getting into the 750Ks at some point because he is that good of a player. I'll just quickly jump over to the Cam Munster deep dives, just bear with me. So yeah, if you look at last year's averages, when he was playing over 60 minutes, it was 68.5. At full 80-minute games, it was 75.4. So a big step up there. I don't necessarily think that that's what he's going to average, but it probably does show you that if he just gets to play, his normal 80-minute games, probably is more likely going to be averaging into the high 60s, low 70s, compared to the 62.2 that he got last year that he's priced at. If you look at that graph on the left there, you can see I've got 3 different scenarios for his 2024 numbers. Basically, it's the same as what I've showed just now, which is that it was his stats for all games, over 60-minute games, and his 80-minute games. Pleasingly, his base was going up in all of those games, so there wasn't necessarily a big drop-off. And that was one thing I thought maybe might reduce if he had hip surgery. Maybe he wasn't getting himself as involved when it came to like maybe defending or taking runs and stuff. That didn't really seem to be the case based on the numbers. And his over 60-minute and 80-minute game numbers do match up much closer with his previous seasons, where he is someone who does average around that kind of low 30s base, and in total averages around the kind of 70s, and in 2022 actually averaged 81 as well. Draw-wise, obviously the opening's not great that you've got that early buy and then Penrith in round 3, but I do think just after that, you've got a clean run of really good games. And we know Munster is someone who also fares generally better against tough opposition. Because if you look at the numbers in that table there, against hard opponents, maybe not last year, but look at the year before, 77 in harder games, 67 in easy games, 86 in hard games in 22, 80 in easy games. So, you could say the draw actually is not really in his favor because he's someone who generally performs better against a tough opposition. That might be enough to say, well, look, early buy, yes, there's Penrith, but I don't actually think I want to be starting with him because the draw is almost too good for him and I need to see more Penrith and Sharks and Bulldogs and all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't necessarily say that's the case. The draw is good. For me, it's probably more, I think, if we get enough certainty in the preseason, and this is where I need someone like an NRL physio, just to be able to tell me that, Cam Munster's had a great preseason, rehab's gone well, looks like he's ready to go round 1, or there's actual quotes from Munster himself saying like, yep, I'm feeling great, feeling awesome, not feeling any residual thing from the hip surgery or whatnot. That might be enough for me to actually go there in round 1. Just because he does offer some genuine value at 609k, the numbers do seem to back up that when he gets back to playing his bigger minute games, he's pretty much the Cam Munster that we've seen historically. So he's very, very tempting. And also because I probably don't think I'm going to be able to get the funds to get a Harry Grant. Probably not going to be starting with Jerome Hughes. I hate cover picks, but Cam Munster is a good pick in his own right. And you probably do also want to get a piece of that Storm team, especially with that really good draw from round 4 onwards. So Cam Munster probably offers the best value. Or you could have like a Pappenhausen. The problem with Pappy is that he's competing in a very competitive fullback position, whereas 5'8", we're seeing there's not really that many picks. If you want to get someone from the Storm spine to capitalize, Munster's probably the best because Grant is obviously the best at hooker, but he's the most expensive as well. Jerome Hughes is very expensive. We spoke about him a bit in the halfback video. whereas Munster actually looks like value. So he's very, very tempting for me. Just going to quickly circle back here to see what his ownership was. 13% ownership. So he is actually the highest owner of these guns. But again, we're looking at 13%. We're not looking at 35, 40% Munster. 13% still is good enough for me in terms of that is low owned, but he's still going to be offering, I think, really good value. So I'm very tempted by Munster. I think I just need to see some kind of confirmation bias in the preseason. If I've got the money and I see the good signs from him, I think I might just pick him in round 1 and just stick with him because I do think he offers good value. The final gun we wanted to mention here is Ben Hunt. Look, probably not many people I think are going here. 4% owned, 603Ks, moved to the Broncos now. He's going to be playing probably in 5'8" while Ezra Mem is suspended. Look, I think with that Dragons team, you can see that he was clearly running the show. He had no base stats, 17 base stat average from last year, but his creative numbers of 32, the highest of anyone else on this particular list here. That was because he was handed the keys to that Dragons team, saying you steer the ship and you are the one who's reliant. We're relying on you basically to score points. Him and Lomax essentially. I don't think that's quite going to be the case at the Broncos. They've got enough other big star players like a Reece Walsh, Adam Reynolds, if he's fit, will steer the ship around as well. I just think that Hunt's creative numbers are going to go down. Broncos, I'd like to see how they perform with under Madge. Draw's actually not that bad, but he is a low base stat player. So while he can pick up big scores, I just get, similar with Burton, I get scared sometimes when he can drop in some like 15 to 20 point games. Not something I'm probably that keen on, I think, seeing in my team in the opening week. So Ben Hunt, probably not going to be an option I'll be considering. So taking a look at some more kind of value 5'8" picks, starting off with Tom Dearden at 598k, average of 61 from last year. Look, with Tom Dearden, I think he's one of those guys who's like just an ever improving player. And you can see that actually in his historical season averages for SuperCoach. So if you look back to 2022 to now, 58, 58, and then 61. Kind of slowly upticking. Even if you go back to 2021, his average was 42. So he's definitely on that upwards trajectory. I just think for him, I'm just more concerned about that Cowboys team. They have lost a few players. Draw-wise, probably not the easiest that you've got the Sharks and Penrith in the opening 6. Then you do have that bye in round 7. I think he's someone who, look, I'm just going to be very honest, probably not one that I've considered at all. I know he's a good player in real life, but I just think look, he does, 14% of games over 80. I think I'd rather just spend 10k more and get Cam Munster versus Tom Dearden. That's just kind of how I'm looking at it in my head. There's such a good pick I can see, only 10,000 more in price, who I've just got so much more confidence in and so much more track record with. I think that's just the guy who I'm going to be leaning. Dearden, I think, is one of those solid picks who you set and forget kind of thing, and you'll kind of eventually equalize to probably getting you about a 63 average. But he does have low games, but he does also have some very big games. I would just like to see how the Cowboys go, I think, before I jump on him. Now, Jarome Luai, very, very highly owned, 24% ownership, 582k, average of 59 from last year, and 24% of his games were scoring over 80. I think the big thing that people are looking at from Luai was from the previous season, where when he was playing at 7, his average was 79.5, and it was 47.2 at number 6. So I think people are looking at it as he's gone to the Tigers, he's got a good draw playing at number 7. Based on last year's numbers, his average should increase when he's the more dominant playmaker. And 100%, he had his big scores, playing at number 7 for the Penrith Panthers. I guess my thing, I might just jump over very quickly to my deep dive slide that I've got on him, so just bear with me. I think the thing I just have with Luai, and I was originally much more keen on him in the preseason, but just kind of looking at it a little bit more, I think it's similar where I'm trying to have that tactic of if there's teams that I'm uncertain of, role that I'm just not quite sure how it's going to go. Luai kind of fits that mold for me at the moment where I just don't quite know how he's going to feature or how he's going to perform in that Tigers team that we've seen struggle over the last few years. Just looking at the numbers as well, I know you probably shouldn't be reading so much into his numbers at Penrith because it is almost completely, a clean slate. Now he's going to the Tigers and handed the keys to number 7. You can see though his averages without Cleary were always better, 66.5 in the last few years, 50.1 with him. So that makes complete sense because Cleary is the dominant playmaker in that Penrith team. The thing with Luai, again, at Penrith, very consistent average-wise, 59, 58, 56, and it looks about the same in 2021, but it could be anything at the West Tigers. So I think for me, clean slate, not quite sure. I just don't know if I want to be taking a punt on him from round 1 with that good draw when we just don't quite know how the team is going to go. Again, I've thought more and more about Cam Munster, and he's only 20k more than Luai. And I feel like I'm getting more of a sure thing if, his health looks pretty good. Look, if there's probably a lack of real other good options and I've got the money only for Luai, he's probably where I'll just land just because of a case of lack of other options. Ideally though, I think I'd go Munster or I'd go Dill Brown or Matt Burton. I'd take Luai probably over Galvin. I think if you're thinking of Galvin, I would maybe just take Luai, getting the same team, but you are getting the more dominant playmaker whose numbers do look better playing at, say, 7 rather than Galvin's was playing at 6. That's one thing I would say. I'd take Luai over Galvin. But again, for me, I think I just need to see it before I can jump on it. That's just really my general thoughts with Luai. There's a few guys on this list here who I'm probably going to skip through a little bit faster because I haven't really considered them. Not that I don't spend time on players who I don't consider. I go through everyone as fairly as I can. But Blaise Talangi is a similar thing where he should be getting the starting 5'8" spot for Penrith, 12% ownership. He had an average of 57 last year playing at the Eels, but that did get increased by a lot of games more playing on the wing or playing at fullbacks. There was only 2 games that Talangi had at number 6 last year where he scored 48 and 30. If you look at fullback though, that's where really he got his big scores, 93, 102 and 87. Playing on the wing, he had some good games as well of 66, 73. The thing is though, playing at 6, his sample size is not that big. Look, moving completely to a new club as well. Look, it's Penrith, so it's obviously a great team. Draw is tough. And my concern though, again, is we're just not quite sure how he's going to feature with Cleary. Looking at Luai as our best comparison, he was averaging around the high 50s at 5'8" playing with Cleary. Talangi averaged 57 from last year. You're probably paying for what you're getting. I don't really see a huge amount of cash increase. If I'm wrong and his role looks completely different and he's going out blitzing it, averaging mid-60s, we can reevaluate at that point. But we just don't quite know at this point. That's why at the moment I haven't really considered Talangi. Cody Walker was garnering some interest as well, but he did have some preseason surgery, which is making him having to race the clock for round 1. And for me, look, he's a low base stat guy, getting older and older. But look, he's been a gun in the past. I just think though that with the Bunnies, if any improvements coming out of them, I feel like Walker will be part of that. His average, if the Bunnies kick off well, I can see Walker being averaging 57, maybe higher to 60, 62. But I think it's more likely going to improve Latrell rather than I think Cody Walker. So that's probably my feeling with Cody. And also now that he was in some doubt for round 1. Braden Trindle, 57 average was pretty solid from last year. I think his opening scores weren't that great, but then really did start to improve. That could be a feature of, he was still working how to play with, Nico Hines. Yeah, he had an 18, 27 and 11 in his opening 3 weeks. After that though, his scores were more like 66, 54, 65. There were some low scores in there of 25 and 30. Big scores 70, 138. Look, put it this way, he's not the most consistent player. His base stats are appalling, if I can say that. A base stat average of 14. I don't want to criticize too much because I'm not out there tackling, so credit to him. But there are some games in there where his base scores are 9, 8, 9, and 7. He is someone who doesn't get much in base. He needs the attacking stats, and so my feeling though is that I think Nico Hines. Look, it's 200k, but he's the goal kicker. I think I'd just take Nico Hines. He actually looks like he's offering some value. Trindle, I feel like this 57, maybe it gets up to 60. Not a huge amount of value though. So I think for me, Trindle is an avoid for now. KO Weeks, I actually talked a bit more about KO Weeks in my fullback video if you want to check that out. Look, he looked pretty good in the trials. Canberra's draw is not that bad actually for the opening kind of 12 weeks in general. His numbers were actually better playing at fullback. Sorry, his numbers better playing in the halves than at fullback. I think he had about a 55 to 56 average playing in the halves or at halfback, and his average at fullback was about 48. So fullback is where he's going to be starting from round 1. Again, I think he's probably someone who does have some excitement in him. He performed well and looked good in the trials. So maybe I look at him maybe as a good draft pick, but maybe not so much for classic. I think, look, if you're wanting to spend a little bit less than 5'8", but you don't want to go all the way down to a cheapie and say Metcalf, you could maybe go Weeks and Metcalf. But he just doesn't look like it's super appealing at this point. I think I might need to see a little bit more out of him. I'd be happier probably just spending up to Luai and Metcalf, for example, if you're looking in this 500 category. Otherwise, I don't mind him because he looks like a good talent, and you can just maybe back the talent, and therefore that's how his scores will improve. But again, for me, not too many games scoring over 80 last year, only 12% of the time. I'm probably not really considering Weeks, I think, that heavily. But of this list here, it would probably be Luai and KO Weeks, I think would be my top two if I had to select out of this bucket. The final few guys I wanted to touch on are Jack Whiten, Luke Metcalf, Adam Doohy, and Will Price. So at the moment, we don't really have any good cheapies emerging in this 5'8 position, hence why we've kind of stopped at Will Price. Look, Jack Whiten, ownership was a little bit interesting, 10%. I thought his ownership would be much less. I think people are probably just buying into the name of Jack Whiten. Probably playing at centers for the Bunnies this year. I just feel like with Whiten, that price of 486, you're paying what you get. So his last year's average was 50, seasons prior to that, 52, 52, 47, and 58. So 2020 was his little bit of an outlier year where it was a little bit higher. Otherwise, he's always been someone, even at Canberra, who was averaging around this kind of 50s. I don't really see that being that different. Maybe you can argue that Wayne Bennett will make things a little bit different. But for me, I just don't really see much value in Whiten, which is fine. If that's what you want, you don't really want to get much cash growth out of him. You're just thinking set and forget, steady 50. Look, maybe he fits the bill there. But then I'll just say, look at the guy below him in Luke Metcalf. 39% ownership. I'm willing to bet that that's higher because I haven't updated these numbers for a week or so when I first pulled this together. Like, I think Luke Metcalf, I don't really need to speak, I think, too much about him. Although we will, because I know he's so highly owned. And if you're living under a rock, you'll be wondering, what's the go with Luke Metcalf? So one is basically that he's looked good in trials. It looks like he's got that starting halfback spot locked in with Tamara Martin at number 6. There's not like a huge amount of evidence of Metcalf from last year when he was playing in the number 7 jersey. In fact, he never really played at number 7. He was playing at number 6 last year. His non-injury game average last year was 58.3 and he's priced at about a 50. So automatically there's already 8 points of value there. He's also picked up the goal kicking. I think this is why he's become so appealing because Warriors so far have looked pretty good in the trials. Overall draw, not that bad. Round 5 and 6 probably where it gets a little bit sticky with the bye and then Melbourne. But apart from that, like Metcalf and the Warriors, they've looked pretty good. You know, he's just looked very good in the trials and he's goal kicking and he's the starting 7. So he looks like he's offering definitely good value. That's the reason why he's so highly owned at the moment. So I think he is someone. Don't overthink this one. I think you go with the crowd. Don't try to go against him for the sake of it. I think you just stick with him. And look, if he fails, at least everyone fails with you, rather than you just not starting him round 1. And if he kills it, and you're like, okay, I need to now use a trade to get him in, when everyone else is kind of one trade ahead. That's probably the only thing I'd say with Metcalf. But definitely, I think lock in to your round 1 team. Adam Doohy is very interesting at 431k. He is someone who historically in seasons gone past is an absolute Supercoach gun. But that was when he was like injury-free, goal kicking for the Tigers. Look, the question I have with him is he goal kicking? If he picks back up the goal kicking, I think Metcalf and Doohy is a really great value pairing at 5'8". If he's not goal kicking, I still think you can go with Doohy, but you probably are looking at someone who's not going to really offer that much value. Maybe he gets up to kind of mid-50s average, but I don't really see a huge amount going up there. So for me, trials watch. If he's goal kicking, I think I'll get him straight into my team. If he's not, then I think I'll still consider it because it's offering a way to reduce money out of that 5'8 spot that doesn't really have too many amazing options. If he's not goal kicking, I think I'll probably lean towards going Metcalf and maybe someone like a Munster. That's currently where my head is at in terms of 5'8. Will Price, it just really depends on him if he's going to be playing in the halves. That doesn't look to be the case. It looks like you're going to have Fletcher Sharp playing at number 6 for the Knights, and I don't think Price is going to be playing at 7. His average last year was very good when he was starting in bigger minute games, but again, role, don't think he's going to be getting it, so probably not an option for now, but one to just keep in your black book just in case he ever does get into that starting halves position for the Knights. Alright guys, that is my 5'8 position breakdown. Hopefully you all enjoyed that one. Please do give it a thumbs up if you did. Please consider subscribing as well if you want to see more content during the preseason and also the 2025 year. And we'll see you all in the next video.